Okay, here we go. In this lecture, we're going to discuss how we can burn more calories, why it's important to burn more calories, and eventually end with how we can make the most of our metabolism, and for most of us that means raising our metabolism. First, the warning information, and I know that you probably have a general idea about this, but there are some amazing statistics. So this is our Surgeon General saying, what are these health consequences of being overweight and obese? 300,000 deaths a year attributed to obesity, and the risk goes up with every pound that you gain. Even moderate weight excess, 10 to 20 pounds for a person of average height, increases your risk of death after age 30. Individuals who are obese, that means their BMI is over 30, have 50 to 100% increased risk of premature death from all causes. So we understand a heart attack, that's a plugged artery that's feeding the blood into the cardiac tissue, and high blood pressure, where the force is just getting higher, and sometimes you can have a stroke associated with that. And then obesity is also associated with a bad blood lipid profile, meaning that the decrease of the good cholesterol. Diabetes is more prevalent the more weight you gain. It used to be called adult onset diabetes. Now they just call it type 2 because more and more of our people are heavier at younger ages. Over 80% of people with diabetes are overweight. And if they lost the weight, many of them would see help in how they handle the blood sugar. It increases the cancer rate for some kinds of cancer, particularly endometrial cancer, colon, gallbladder, prostate, kidney, and postmenopausal breast cancer. Women that gain more than 20 pounds from age 18 to midlife double their risk of breast cancer compared to women whose weight remains stable. In the previous lecture, we talked about visceral fat. This is the fat around our organs. And here we're talking a little bit about why that is. They used to think fat was kind of just inert and would just sit there. And subcutaneous fat is more that way. Not absolutely, but more just inert, sits there, you're storing calories. But this visceral fat churns out inflammatory factors and hormones, and that can really wreak havoc on a body. Calcium deposits were also associated with this visceral fat, and that's a marker for atherosclerosis. That's clogging up your arteries. Shifting the attention, as we looked before at the way, whether it was beer bellies or however you want to think about that, but that idea of the protruding belly, that is becoming a risk factor all by itself. That if you just take your waist, and as that goes up, so does your risk of cardiac events and these other things, because it's assuming that most of that is going to be visceral fat when it just comes out there. The other kind of fat, when it's subcutaneous, it's more like that wetsuit idea where it's spread out all over your body. Here's the example we looked at before where you took a cross-section. Let's say that was an arm. This is probably a leg, though I see two bones there. And here, this is the muscle. There's a bone. There's a bone. And this is the fat around it. This one not only has fat around it, it's what we might call, if you were a butcher, marbled meat. And it might be good for a steak, but it's not good for a human. You don't want to have this fat all within your muscle fibers. Here's a picture, and again, you can see why this might not be good. And as we zoom in on this, you can see not only does this person have subcutaneous fat, but it's huge amounts of visceral fat. And this is what we want to avoid. This obviously in the legs as well, but what I'm also trying to show is a normal person, what they would look like, or someone of average weight, and how they don't have all this fat stored inside. That brings us to, what are we going to do about this? How does our body burn calories? One of the ways is basal metabolism, the other is digestion, and the last is physical activity. We have some effect on all three. Obviously, physical activity is the one we have the most control over. Your basal metabolism is actually the amount of calories you burn just being alive. And so if you're a bigger person, meaning more muscle and all that, not necessarily an obese person, you're going to burn more calories. If you're a big person compared to, like, let's say you're a healthy 200 pounds as opposed to a healthy 100 pounds, that 200-pound person is going to need more calories. So just being alive, being awake is going to burn more calories than being asleep. But those are all resting, and so basal really is just your basic, but where resting is a little bit more. There's different ways to do it, but it means non-activity caloric burn. Now, this is as a percentage. So you can see here that it can range anywhere from 50 to 75% of your daily caloric expenditure. If your basic, if your basic basal metabolic percentage is high because you don't exercise, that's not good, because it's a large part of your total percentage of calories burned. But if it's high because you have a lot of muscle and you exercise at high intensity and you're warm all the time, and you're just this machine that's constantly burning calories, that's a very good positive thing for you. There's ways to estimate this through formulas and also through measuring how much oxygen you utilize when you exercise. And the more oxygen you utilize, you have a higher basal metabolic rate. I said that as exercise, and really it's just you could do this sedentary as well. So you're just sitting there, and when you breathe in oxygen, you don't utilize all of it, and some of it you bring back out. The more you utilize, you have a higher metabolic rate. Digestion. This is going to be really practical for us. It's not the biggest thing, and people try to make whole diets about this, but it's significant, and so it's important. But basically, if you eat, and let's say you eat 3 or 4 times a day, you're going to have to burn calories to digest those foods. And so that can make up around 10% of your calories. So for somebody that eats 2,000 calories a day, that's about 200 calories. Now, as we look at some of these other kinds of issues, and I'm afraid that sometimes people just go nuts on this, but it's important. Of the macronutrients, that's carbohydrates, protein, fats, which ones have the highest thermic effect? And what that means is, which one is it going to take more calories for you to digest and use as energy, and which is going to be the least? And I think there's some interesting things here. And it ends up, protein takes the most calories to process it, metabolize it, and use it as energy. So that's part of why people sometimes push for high protein diets. But and so if you were out of carbohydrates, that's what would happen, and you would use even a lot of those to do it. Let me throw in here that protein has 4 calories for every 1 gram. Carbohydrates has 4 calories for every 1 gram, but fat has 9 calories for every 1 gram. And so of the 4 calories that you eat, if you need it for energy, you're not going to get all 4 calories. You're going to use some of those calories to metabolize the protein. Carbohydrates are interesting because in there we would subdivide this out into some more detail. But basically, the simple sugars or carbohydrates, you're not going to need a lot of calories to process those. Where the more complex carbohydrates and with more fiber, it's going to be a longer process and a few more calories. The water is also interesting, and really where it's going to mean much of any kind of effect is on really cold water. If you drink really cold water, your body has to use a couple calories to raise that temperature before it'll be absorbed. But it's kind of neat in this list because look at fat. Fat, you can eat fat and it almost goes in and can be stored very easily and metabolized eventually for energy, possibly if you need it, without losing many of its calories. And so a high-fat diet is very efficient. Some women that tried to cross Antarctica, they took very high-fat diets. And that worked for them. But for most of us, this is not a good idea. Physical activity. If you're not exercising, you're not making use of this. And this is what we have some effect over. And we're going to spend a lot of time looking at what kinds of activities are probably the most effective for this. We're all kind of guilty about finding the easy way, the stairs or the elevator, which one we're going to do. And so here I have some slides that just kind of remind us of those kinds of things. How can we get on the high side of each one of these, on the basal metabolism, on digestion, and on physical activity? And so here, this is to show us that really it's hard because this is percentages, right? We don't see the total. And so what we're assuming here is that if they had the same total calories, the one on the left would be better, because only half of theirs is from basal metabolism, because they're spending so much in physical activity. Here they have so little physical activity that overall they're just not spending many calories at all. And so this we would prefer to be this way. Okay, this is going to help us, I hope. This is NEAT, the NEAT factor, N-E-A-T, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So how do we burn calories without exercising? And what they found was that people that fidget burn calories. And so they actually, it's kind of interesting, they put together this special pair of underwear. And I assume it's almost like thermal underwear, because it measured all the movements that a person made. And as they did that through their day, they ended up burning, let's say it's only 50 to 100 calories. That's a big deal over a lifetime if you do that every single day for 365. So that's a big deal. And so people that fidget and can't sit still, they're going to burn more calories. The opposite is also true. If you're like a tree sloth, if you can just sit there and almost go to sleep, you're burning almost no calories. And we don't want that. We want to keep our metabolism high. We want to burn calories. So when we make these choices, we can choose escalator or stairs. This is down in Point Loma, and it's been all over the world on this because of the irony of all of this. You're going to a fitness workout event, and you need to take the escalator to get there. That's kind of funny, but you can see over here on the side it says Point Loma. Okay, that's a little comical, but it kind of speaks to the way we are, the way we look at things. Is there a way to make this any easier for us? I'm not sure that's very safe, though. So we talked about the fidgeting. This has to do with other ways to do it. Things like standing, taking the stairs, pacing, chewing gum, typing, talking, all of these kinds of things. So here, as they put all the calories that come from activity, you can see how NEAT can add up for some people. If you have very small NEAT and you don't exercise, you're way behind everybody else in burning calories. Small but sustained changes in everyday activities can profoundly affect the energy balance. Instead, one could progressively change the environment to discourage sitting behaviors. So as you look at this, you can think of your own day. Think of a college student. They get up in the morning, maybe they have breakfast, maybe they don't. If you're working, maybe you have to commute, maybe you're here on campus. And then basically you sit until lunch. And then you sit and have lunch. And then after that, maybe in the afternoon you get some exercise, but basically then you sit and you sit and you sit and you sit and you go to bed. And so if you just counted up how many hours a day you sit and are so sedentary. So think about that. Think about the career that you're planning. I think one of the scariest one is IT people. They sit so much and just watch things happen on the computer and those kinds of things. And as we know, more jobs are going toward technology like that. It's tough. And so you have to plan in times. Try not to, well, ideally it'd be every half hour you would get up and move. The longer you sit, whether you're studying or reading or anything else, by the time you get to 2 hours, you have slowed down your metabolism so much. But if you wiggle, if you do that. So let's look at some ways when you can do this. Now, I know some of these are crazy, but that's not the idea. The idea is, does it make you think of anything else that would be practical for you? So here, this is just more ergonomics, making it comfortable for him because I don't see him moving there. But you see how people are working on these kinds of activities. Now here, you see how much she's going to have to be contracting those the muscles in her back to keep her balance. She's going to fall off balance. She's going to use her hips and legs. And so even that kind of fidgeting helps. It's better than just slouching on the couch or something like that. So we see exercise balls used a lot. We have some faculty members that use them. My back gets tired pretty fast and I end up with really bad posture. This is a way that people with some money can invest in a way where they can walk while they're doing tasks, and it can really help them. Here's little tiny foot exercisers. It just goes up and down, and it's just a way to keep your calf going, blood flowing, all of those kinds of things. And it looks like this. This one doesn't even have anything that moves. I mean, the whole board is just built kind of like a banana board there where it wobbles back and forth, and you just play with it with your feet. And again, it's just better than being totally still. Here's one where it puts together, and obviously I don't know anybody that can afford this whole kind of get up for their office station. But here's a homemade one where he just put his exercise bike under a big table and he does his work. He's not trying to bike, the Tour de France. He's just trying to keep the blood circulating slow and easy, not necessarily even getting sweaty, but it's all going to make a difference. Here's a little mini one for home or office. This one, obviously a homemade situation. He's going to have to do something or that bike's going to push that whole stand. Here's another homemade one. So people have thought this through and they can see how this. I really like this, where kids have the option of standing and sitting while they work. Think about that for yourself. I like to eat breakfast a lot of times standing because I'm going to go somewhere and sit right away. So I like to get some standing in, and especially with one leg up and those kinds of things. So again, if we can increase our exercise part with these non-exercise activities, then we're ahead of the game. Again, this is the idea that we can't just diet. And I know we saw this in the last lecture, but it's so important to keep thinking that it's by exercise that we burn that internal fat. Creeping obesity is an important concept, meaning if you just put on 2 pounds this year, that's not a big deal. But if you did that every year you were in college, now you're 8 pounds heavier. If you do that for the next 10 years, now you're 20 pounds overweight. In 20 years, you're 40 pounds overweight. And that's kind of what happens in the United States. Some good news, depending on where we look, that maybe our obesity rate has plateaued. Others say it's still climbing, and really what it comes down to is whether they look at totals or if they look at individual groups. And so here we look at the kids. Here's 2 to 5, 8 to 11, 12 to 19, and it ends up that both white and Hispanics tend to put on weight, and then they lose a little bit as they get past 12 and 19, where blacks continue to add weight as they get older. And then over here, the 20 and over, you can see black women are by far the heaviest as a group, then Hispanic women, and then white women. As men, it doesn't seem to matter as much. All of them kind of have their tendency to add weight as they age. One of the ways that we measure this is a body mass index. It's my least favorite. It's everybody's least favorite, but it's just quick and easy is how it got started. It got started with insurance companies using it to try to predict when you're going to die and then charge you a certain amount for your premium. And so it works for them, but for many people it doesn't work. We're going to fill it out in the in your spreadsheet of all the ways to calculate body composition. It's just one other tool. The people it doesn't work with is people that have muscle, and so we'll look at that at the end. So this puts them into large groups, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. So these two people could weigh the same, but they don't have the same health risk. If this is all muscle, he's coming out with the same BMI as this guy. If they're the same height and same weight, but his composition is so different. Now, for most people, they're neither one of these extremes, and so maybe a BMI works for them. But for a lot of reasons, there's better ways to do it. So now as we end burning calories, I want to move on to this idea of cardiovascular fitness and why it's so important for us. If your resting heart rate is above 80 beats a minute, quadruples your chance of developing a heart attack. And here, they have different studies. These have been replicated in many places, and we'll look at a little bit different numbers and all that kind of thing. But basically what we know is your resting heart rate is an indicator. The best indicator is after you exercise, how quickly does your heart return to near normal? That would be the best indicator, and that was what step tests do. A step test is where you step up and down for 3 minutes on a 16.5-inch bench, and then and the metronome is telling you how fast to. So we know that the height is standard, and we know the time is, and we see how high your heart gets, and then we stand still afterwards and wait for a minute and see how quickly it returns to near normal. Resting heart rate measures in beats per minute after sitting still to gauge how well the heart works when not stressed. And women with resting rates of more than 76 beats per minute were found to have 26% more likely to have a heart attack or die than those with heart rates of 62 beats per minute or lower. Heart rate is usually lower among people who are physically fit, but regardless of how much they exercise, some people have lower heart rates. And again, recovery is the best, but resting is still good too. And so if you're a small person and you do that step test, you might have to work harder than, let's say, a tall person to step up and down, even though that person's carrying more weight. But when you stop, does your heart return to near normal quickly? When you walk from the gym up to Nicholson Commons, does your heart rate get up and then stay up? That's not good. This is what's actually going on in the heart. And the whole reason I'm going into this is so that you understand why exercise is going to help you. Cardiac output is how much blood leaves your heart per minute. And so as we look at this, and this is a silly little thing, but it's kind of fun to look at, that as we exercise and we're producing this CO2, we need to get rid of it. And so it's brought back in the blood to the heart and then through the heart over to the lungs. And this is all great. And this is why you breathe a little bit heavier when you exercise more, because you have more of this CO2 to get rid of. And that goes out. Well, what we're really doing there in the lungs is exchanging that for new, fresh O2. And as that comes in, now is where we really get to the place where it's kind of important here. Because this left ventricle is going to shoot it out through the rest of our body. So here, it's going to come here through, and this is the aorta, and this is going out to our whole body. If we're very efficient, we can have a low heart rate and still deliver a lot of oxygen. How are we going to do that? Isn't that just kind of cool to look at? This is also a heart. These would be these vessels that I was talking about. That if they get plugged, this is when you have a heart attack, and then that part of the muscle would die. And so if you had a big one like this, it would affect a lot. And if you have a little tiny one here, it's probably you'll survive, etc. Okay, getting back to cardiac output. The formula is how fast your heart is rating. That's heart rate, how fast it's going, and the stroke volume. And we haven't defined that yet. And the stroke volume was that left ventricle I was talking about. When it contracts, it's going to squish blood out. And the more blood that's squished out every beat, then you have a higher stroke volume. And the more fit you are, then that chamber, those walls come closer together, and it's more complete emptying every time, and you're going to squirt more blood out. And as this goes up, then this can go down, and you still maintain the same amount of cardiac output. So when you exercise, really, your resting heart rate will go down because your stroke volume goes up. Did you know a heart rate between 62 and 68 is good? I think sometimes you see that number 72 floated around for average. Your college students, you should probably be better than that. But 62 to 68 would be fine. Below 55 is excellent, and above 80 is risky. Now, I want to introduce you to this idea of some of these apps, and I'm sure you know some that I don't, and we can share those in our discussion board, etc. So here, this is using sound. And so this guy has his iPhone over here, and he's actually listening to his heart. And then similarly here, he's using his headphones, and is listening to the rush of the blood going by his carotid artery. But the one I'm going to suggest we all use is called Instant Heart Rate. And the reason I like it so much is, first off, it's free, and it works really, really well. So if you have a smartphone, what you do is, and it works on any kind, you use the light, and the light checks through your finger. You don't push too hard, or you're going to kind of crimp your blood vessel and affect it. And then it'll just measure your heartbeat. And so this is what we're going to do with some testing to see how we're doing with our cardiovascular fitness. And we can keep track of this, and you can turn this in to me. But this is an easy, free app that might be fun for you. We know there's lots of them out there. We will talk about this and see if there's others that work for you. You might share that with somebody else in the class that they didn't know about. Pedometers are also very popular now on how many steps you take and whatever. I kind of like gadgets, but by far my favorite is the heart rate one. Okay, a few slides here on metabolism. This, I think, is really important for us to make sure we understand. So if, let's say I had a college student and she was a little bit heavy, and she wanted to lose weight, and she's worked hard at this her whole life, and it's just hard, and she's in college, and she's going to start a new life, and she says, okay, I'm just not going to eat. So she doesn't eat breakfast. For lunch, she has some lettuce, and at dinner, she has a little chicken breast and some string beans. That's horrible, okay? Because what's happening is she's turning her body into a Mini Cooper. Now, I don't know about them as cars, but what I'm knowing here is the energy they expend is very little, but they have very little power and energy as well. And so we don't want our bodies to be Mini Coopers. We want our bodies to be gas guzzlers, like these old GTOs. This thing, I used to own one, and when you accelerated, you could actually see the gas gauge move. And that's not a good thing in this day and age with gas prices. But we want a big, powerful metabolism that constantly is burning calories. If it's just sitting idling in your driveway, it's burning a lot of calories. That's what we want. So there's some tips here. There's only a couple I'm going to point out. And first off, don't diet. And when we say diet, everybody has a diet. So what we're really talking about is a restrictive diet. You need to eat. If you starve your body, you're going to use muscle, and that's going to waste away muscle, and you're going to have a smaller engine. We don't want that. So you need to eat. Now, you can eat less at every meal, but you need to eat, and that's going to keep your metabolism higher. If you try to skip meals, that goes against your body. But you can replace high-calorie foods with nutritious foods, and you can try to keep muscle on and keep it metabolically active. So that's part of that exercise part. When you cut back calories, reduce the carbohydrates and the fats. Now, unless you're a long-distance runner and you need the high carbs and that kind of thing, but for most of us, and I'm talking about general exercise, if you exercise over an hour or something like that of continually high, then maybe you need more carbs. But most of us are going to do better with keeping our protein level the same and cut back carbs and cut back fat. And the reason is you need that protein to keep the muscle on you. And so when you see those starving kids around the world and their elbow is bigger than their arm, it's because they've used that muscle for energy. And we don't want to do that. We want to have that muscle there to be a bigger engine for 24/7. Try to find neat activities. Don't sit, don't vegetate, don't become a sloth. Don't just sit for hours without moving. This is not going to help us. Okay, if we can put muscle on our body, we might weigh the same, but it takes up less space. So here, 5 pounds of muscle takes up about as much space as 3 tangerines, but 5 pounds of fat takes up as much space as grapefruit. So we know weight is not the whole story, and that's why if we can do something like a body composition thing where we understand this is how much fat I have on my body and this is how much muscle, and we know water fluctuates and different things like that. But the weight might be fine. It's just that you have too much fat and not enough muscle. We want to have muscle. If I have girls out there that are just going, I don't want to get big, we can work with that. We don't want you to get big either if that's not what you want. So you can lose fat and still stay the same weight if you replace it with muscle. And that's a good thing because now you can still burn more calories. Okay, now I hope this works for you. So here's some examples of people I've worked with here at Point Loma. So this first one is a guy. And so when he came into class, he weighed 165 pounds. And these were these are the millimeters at his pec, his chest, his stomach, and his thigh. And he ended up with an estimated 19.6% of his body was fat. Well, if that's true, and he weighed this, that would mean he has 32 pounds of fat and 132 pounds of lean tissue. Now, that's not just muscle, that's bone, that's organ, that's everything else. But the fat is 32 pounds. He came back a year later. He weighed 6 pounds more. But look at his percentages on the skin folds. He was at 7 millimeters, 13 down from 34. And all of these, the thigh stayed closer to the same, but these were about half of what they were. And he was at 9% body fat. Well, how can he weigh more and have less fat? He gained muscle. So now he gained 20 pounds of muscle. He worked out, he changed his whole life. He goes, I'm going to get fit, I'm going to stay fit. And so he added 6 pounds of weight, but it ends up by losing 10% of fat, he gained 15 pounds. He lost 15 pounds of fat and he gained 20 pounds of lean tissue. So this is the ultimate, right? If you wanted to be this way athletic and big and that kind of thing. Okay, my second example is a girl, and this particular girl was in our major, and she wanted to be a basketball coach. So the basketball coach let her go out for the team, even though she was overweight. He just thought it'd be good for her to get this kind of experience, and she could help in practices, and she was more of a manager than a player. But what happened was, when she started, she was 188 pounds. She dropped weight and was able to, actually, by the time she was a senior, she contributed to the team and she played. But the way she did it was through exercise. And so here, her weight is here. She was at 40% of her body was fat. The next year, she got it down to 30%, and then she got down to about 25%. So when she did this, this means she went from carrying 75 pounds of fat on her body to 45 to 38. Now, you have to have some fat on you. She could have lost a couple more if she wanted, but she was fine. But this is what is just absolutely amazing. Her lean tissue, she kept about 112 the whole time. And that's because she was exercising. So not only was she running in basketball practice, they were hitting the weight room. And she kept that lean tissue on, and that's why she was successful, because she kept her metabolism up. If she had just lost the weight by dieting, her muscles would have shrunk. She would have had a slower metabolism. She would have had to eat less and less and less to keep the progress going that way. So she lost 37 pounds, 14.8% of body fat, and she kept the lean where she was. Now, this one is a special one. This is a faculty member, and he had a big belly, and he wanted to get rid of it. And so here he was, 47 pounds over, this is several years. And what he did, he ended up losing 10% of his body fat, and this was all great. But what happened was, of this, he lost 30 pounds of fat, and he lost 16 pounds of lean, because he did this just by diet. So when through several issues here, we got him in the weight room, and so that he could keep some of that muscle on, and so that he wouldn't just waste away into nothingness here. And so that's really important. He was a walker and a dieter, and what we ended up doing was giving him a few strength exercises as well. So through all these, if we think about this, this is what I'm hoping the concept is coming through. The guy that we first talked about, basically he turned his body into a GTO. He's burning calories all the time. He's warm all the time. And he has lots of energy and can eat lots of calories. Think of Olympic athletes and how much they can eat. Here we have probably where most of us want to be, a healthy, fit person that is taking in a few less calories, but also adding exercise to their lifestyle and keeping the muscle on by doing some weight training, and you're just a nice, efficient machine. We want to avoid this. These people, not only do they get smaller, they get cold. If you're cold all the time and those kinds of things, you might be losing muscle, and your body's trying to preserve as much as it can with that energy. And we don't want to turn into Mini Coopers, so let's try to avoid that. It's kind of like this idea of, if we do diet alone compared to diet and exercise, and then a lot of weightlifting there, but we don't want this. We don't want to starve ourselves and just be emaciated and have, muscle falling off. And then she can eat so little and still maintain that. This is what we want. We want a healthy body that's got some muscle on it, but it can lean out, and it can be active, and you can be fit.